What if I told you that once upon a time, a creature existed that could stand on two legs like a human, reach heights of 6 meters, weigh as much as an elephant, and had claws longer than your hand? What if this giant wasn't a predator, but a peaceful herbivore that could tear down entire trees just to eat their leaves? Today, we're exploring the incredible world of Megatherium, the giant ground sloth that dominated South America. And we're asking, what would happen if this colossal gentle giant still roamed our forests today? Now we continue our documentary with extinct species today. Megatherium americanum. The name literally means Great Beast of America, and it's one of the most fitting scientific names ever given. This creature was truly a great beast, one of the largest land mammals to ever walk the Americas, and one of the most bizarre animals in the entire fossil record. The first Megatherium skeleton was discovered in 1788 near Buenos Aires, Argentina. Local residents had found enormous bones eroding from a riverbank and brought them to authorities, thinking they might be the remains of a giant human or perhaps a biblical creature. When the bones were sent to Spain for examination, scientists were astounded. This was unlike anything known to science at the time. The skeleton was so complete and so massive that it became a sensation across Europe. Georges Cuvier, the father of paleontology, studied the Megatherium fossils and made a revolutionary conclusion. This animal was extinct. This was a shocking idea in the late 18th century, when most people believed that God's creations were permanent and unchanging. The very concept that species could disappear from the earth was controversial. Megatherium became one of the first animals to prove that extinction was real, fundamentally changing our understanding of life's history. Megatherium lived during the Pleistocene epoch, from approximately 2 million years ago until about 10,000 years ago. This means Megatherium was a contemporary of early humans. Our ancestors actually encountered these giants, hunted them, and may have contributed to their extinction. Cave paintings and archaeological evidence suggest humans and Megatherium interacted, though the exact nature of these interactions remains debated. The size of Megatherium is difficult to comprehend. Adults reached lengths of 6 meters from nose to tail. When standing upright on their hind legs, which they could do with ease, they reached heights of 5 to 6 meters. To visualize this, imagine an animal that could look into a second-story window. Their weight ranged from 3 to 4 tons, comparable to a modern African elephant. Some exceptionally large individuals may have weighed even more. Despite being called a sloth, Megatherium was nothing like the slow, tree-dwelling sloths we know today. Modern sloths are small, weighing just a few kilograms, and spend their lives hanging upside down from branches. Megatherium, in contrast, was a ground dweller. It was far too large to climb trees, so instead, it brought the trees down to its level. The body structure of Megatherium was extraordinary. Its skeleton was incredibly robust, with massive bones to support its tremendous weight. The hind legs were elephant-like, thick and pillar-shaped, capable of bearing the animal's full weight when it stood upright. The tail was exceptionally thick and muscular, acting as a third support point when Megatherium reared up. This tripod stance, rear legs plus tail, was remarkably stable and allowed Megatherium to stand for extended periods while feeding. The front limbs were shorter but incredibly powerful. They ended in enormous curved claws, some measuring over 30 centimeters in length. These claws were not used for walking. Instead, Megatherium walked on the sides of its front feet, with the claws curled inward. This unusual gait, called knuckle walking, protected the sharp claws from wear and kept them ready for their primary purposes: digging and pulling down branches. The skull of Megatherium reveals it was a herbivore. The teeth were simple pegs, continuously growing throughout life to compensate for wear from grinding tough vegetation. There were no front teeth for biting. Instead, Megatherium likely used its long, prehensile tongue and powerful lips to strip leaves from branches. The jaw muscles were extremely powerful, capable of processing huge quantities of plant material. What did Megatherium eat? The South American environment during the Pleistocene was diverse. Grasslands, open woodlands, and forests provided abundant vegetation. Megatherium's diet probably included leaves, twigs, bark, and possibly fruits. Its ability to stand upright gave it access to vegetation other herbivores couldn't reach. Trees that were safe from ground-level browsers were vulnerable to Megatherium, which could simply stand up and pull branches down. The claws served multiple functions beyond feeding. They were formidable weapons. While Megatherium was a herbivore, it was far from defenseless. Those massive claws could deliver devastating slashes. Standing upright, Megatherium would have been an intimidating sight to any predator. Even the largest predators of the time, including saber-toothed cats and giant short-faced bears, would think twice before attacking a healthy adult Megatherium. There's evidence that Megatherium may have occasionally dug for food. Those powerful claws and strong forelimbs could excavate roots, tubers, and perhaps even termite mounds. This dietary flexibility would have been advantageous, allowing Megatherium to survive in various habitats and during different seasons. The fur of Megatherium is known from preserved remains found in caves. It was thick and shaggy, ranging in color from reddish-brown to gray. Beneath the fur, the skin contained small bones called osteoderms, creating a kind of armor. This bony armor would have provided additional protection against predators and perhaps even helped support the animal's massive weight. Social behavior in Megatherium is uncertain. Fossil evidence suggests they were probably solitary or lived in small family groups. Large herbivores today often gather in herds for protection, but Megatherium's size and defensive capabilities meant it had little to fear from predators once fully grown. Males may have been territorial, using their size and claws to compete for mates and feeding areas. Reproduction would have been similar to other large mammals. Females probably gave birth to a single offspring after a lengthy gestation period. The young Megatherium would have been relatively large at birth, but still vulnerable. Mothers likely provided extended parental care, teaching their young which plants to eat and how to defend themselves. Growth to full adult size would have taken many years, perhaps a decade or more. The habitat of Megatherium varied. They lived across much of South America, from tropical regions to more temperate zones. Fossils have been found in modern-day Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and other countries. This wide distribution suggests Megatherium was adaptable, capable of thriving in different environments as long as sufficient vegetation was available. During the Pleistocene, South America was home to an incredible megafauna. Alongside Megatherium lived Glyptodon, a giant armadillo the size of a car, Toxodon, a rhino-like herbivore, and Macrauchenia, a camel-like creature with a trunk. Predators included Smilodon, the famous saber-toothed cat, and various giant birds of prey. This was an ecosystem unlike anything on Earth today. Around 10,000 years ago, Megatherium vanished. The cause of extinction is still debated, but two main factors are suspected: climate change and human hunting. The end of the last ice age brought dramatic environmental shifts. Temperatures rose, ice sheets melted, and vegetation patterns changed. Forests expanded in some areas while grasslands dominated others. These changes may have disrupted Megatherium's food sources and habitat. Human impact was likely significant. As human populations spread through the Americas, they encountered and hunted megafauna. Evidence from archaeological sites shows humans killed and butchered large animals, including ground sloths. Megatherium, despite its size and defenses, was vulnerable to organized human hunters using spears, fire, and coordinated tactics. The combination of environmental stress and hunting pressure probably drove Megatherium to extinction. The disappearance of Megatherium had cascading effects on South American ecosystems. As a mega-herbivore, Megatherium shaped vegetation through its feeding. Without it, forests grew denser, the balance between different plant species shifted, and the landscape gradually transformed. The extinction of Megatherium was part of a broader collapse of Pleistocene megafauna worldwide, an event that fundamentally changed Earth's ecosystems. Now, let's imagine the impossible. What if Megatherium never went extinct? What if, through some quirk of fate, this giant ground sloth still walked the Earth today? The implications would be profound and far-reaching. First, consider habitat. Modern Megatherium would need extensive forested or wooded areas with abundant vegetation. The Amazon rainforest could potentially support populations. The Atlantic forest of Brazil, though much reduced from its historical extent, might harbor some. Grassland forest mosaics in the Pampas region could work. However, suitable habitat is increasingly fragmented and under pressure from human activities. A single megatherium would consume hundreds of kilograms of vegetation daily. In areas with high megatherium densities, the impact on forests would be dramatic. Trees would be stripped, branches broken, and vegetation heavily browsed. This isn't necessarily negative. Like elephants in Africa, Megatherium could maintain open woodland habitats, preventing forests from becoming too dense and creating spaces for other species. Human-Megatherium conflict would be inevitable. Agricultural areas near Megatherium habitats would suffer damage. Imagine waking up to find a 4-ton animal has demolished your orchard or vegetable garden overnight. Fences that stop cattle would be useless against Megatherium, which could simply tear them apart with its claws. Compensation programs would be necessary to help affected farmers, but resentment would still build. Direct danger to humans is more ambiguous. Megatherium was not a predator and would have no interest in eating people. However, its sheer size and those massive claws make it potentially lethal if threatened or surprised. A startled Megatherium could accidentally injure or kill someone. Males in breeding season might be aggressive, defending territory or competing for mates. Close encounters would be extremely dangerous. Conservation would face enormous challenges. Protecting Megatherium would require vast reserves, far larger than what's currently dedicated to wildlife. We're talking about areas of tens of thousands of square kilometers, with diverse habitats to support viable populations. The cost would be staggering, and political will to set aside such large areas would be difficult to muster, especially in countries with growing human populations and economic development pressures. Anti-poaching efforts would be critical. Megatherium would be targets for trophy hunters, people seeking meat, and those wanting claws or other body parts for traditional medicine or collectors. With modern weapons, killing a Megatherium would be easy. Only strict enforcement, severe penalties, and community engagement could prevent poaching. On the positive side, Megatherium ecotourism could be transformative. Imagine tours to see giant ground sloths in the wild. The experience would be unparalleled. Watching a Megatherium stand upright to feed, seeing its massive claws strip branches, hearing its vocalizations, would draw tourists from around the world. Revenue from this tourism could fund conservation and provide economic benefits to local communities. Scientifically, living Megatherium would be a treasure trove. Researchers could study its biomechanics. How does an animal this large support itself on 2 legs? What are the limits of terrestrial mammal size? Physiological studies would examine metabolism, digestion, and thermoregulation. Behavioral research could explore social structures, communication, and learning. The claws would be of particular interest. How are they used precisely? Do different individuals have different techniques? Are there cultural behaviors passed from mothers to offspring? Tool use, if any, would be fascinating to document. The tongue, thought to be prehensile, could be studied in action. Ecological studies would examine Megatherium's role as an ecosystem engineer. Does its feeding create habitats for other species? How do its activities affect forest structure, plant diversity, and nutrient cycling? Does Megatherium disperse seeds? And if so, which plants depend on it? These questions would provide insights applicable to conservation of other large herbivores. Genetic research would illuminate Megatherium's evolutionary history and its relationship to modern sloths. How much genetic diversity exists? Are there distinct populations or subspecies? Could genetic tools help manage populations and prevent inbreeding? Understanding Megatherium genetics would also inform broader questions about mammalian evolution and adaptation. Culturally, Megatherium would become iconic. Its unique appearance, standing upright like a giant furry human with enormous claws, would capture imaginations worldwide. It would appear in movies, books, and art. Unlike elephants or bears, which have long been part of human culture, Megatherium would be new, strange, and exotic. Indigenous peoples would likely have continuous traditions involving Megatherium, passed down through generations. Stories, rituals, and knowledge about coexisting with the giant sloth would exist. These cultural connections would be valuable for conservation, as communities with traditional ties to wildlife often become the most effective stewards. Modern popular culture would embrace Megatherium. Animated films would feature it as a gentle giant character. Video games would include it. Documentaries would make it a star. The contrast between its fearsome appearance and herbivorous nature would be endlessly discussed. Memes and internet culture would adopt Megatherium imagery. Climate change poses unique challenges. Rising temperatures might stress Megatherium, especially if its thick fur is adapted to cooler Pleistocene climates. Changing vegetation patterns could affect food availability. Extreme weather events, fires, floods, and droughts would threaten habitats and populations. Conservation strategies would need to account for these dynamic threats. Habitat connectivity would be crucial. Megatherium would need to move between areas to find food, mates, and suitable conditions. Wildlife corridors connecting protected areas would be essential. However, creating and maintaining these corridors through human-dominated landscapes would be incredibly difficult. Roads, farms, and cities fragment habitats, creating barriers for large animals. Disease is another concern. Modern pathogens might affect Megatherium in unknown ways. Conversely, Megatherium might carry diseases that could jump to livestock or humans. Managing disease risk would require monitoring, research, and possibly interventions like vaccination programs. Reintroduction programs might be considered if Megatherium populations declined. Captive breeding could maintain genetic diversity and provide individuals for release into protected areas. However, reintroducing animals weighing several tons, with specific habitat needs and potentially dangerous claws, would be complex and risky. The economic impact of Megatherium conservation would be substantial. Protected areas would need funding for rangers, research, infrastructure, and community programs. Opportunity costs from land that can't be developed or farmed would be significant. However, ecotourism revenue, ecosystem services like carbon sequestration and water regulation, and the intrinsic value of biodiversity could justify these costs. International cooperation would be necessary. Megatherium historically ranged across multiple modern countries. Conservation would require coordinated efforts, shared resources, and common policies. Treaties and agreements would be needed, similar to those protecting migratory species like whales and birds. Education would play a vital role, teaching people about Megatherium, its ecological importance, and conservation needs would build support. School programs, public awareness campaigns, and media coverage would be essential. When people understand and value a species, they're more likely to support its protection. The existence of Megatherium would raise philosophical questions. What is our relationship with nature? Do we have the right to dominate the landscape, or should we share it with other species? How do we balance human needs with wildlife conservation? These aren't easy questions, but Megatherium would force us to confront them. In many ways, Megatherium represents what we've lost. The Pleistocene megafauna were incredible, and their extinction impoverished our world. Living Megatherium would be a link to that lost richness, a reminder of what once was and what could be again if we make better choices. Megatherium also represents possibility. It shows that nature is capable of creating forms we can barely imagine. A giant sloth that stands like a human? It sounds like fantasy, yet it was real. This should humble us and inspire us. What other wonders might nature create if given the chance? The story of Megatherium is ultimately about coexistence. Can humans share the planet with large, sometimes inconvenient wildlife? History suggests we struggle with this. We've driven countless species to extinction, but we've also learned. Conservation successes show that when we commit to protecting wildlife, we can make a difference. If Megatherium existed today, our response would define us. Would we see it as a pest to be eliminated, a curiosity to be exploited, or a wonder to be protected? The answer would reveal our values and our vision for the future. Megatherium americanum, the great beast of America, a giant that stood tall, reached high, and lived peacefully for millions of years. Then, in geological terms, it disappeared in an instant. Early humans watched Megatherium vanish, perhaps hastening its end through hunting. Now, we live in a world without giant ground sloths, a world diminished by their absence. But the memory of Megatherium endures. It teaches us about adaptation, about the incredible diversity of life, and about the fragility of even the mightiest creatures. It reminds us that extinction is forever, that once a species is gone, no technology can truly bring it back. What do you think? If Megatherium still walked the earth, would you want to see one standing upright, towering above the trees? Could modern societies coexist with a 4-ton herbivore that could accidentally destroy property and potentially harm people? And most importantly, what would having Megatherium among us teach us about conservation and our responsibility to other species? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this journey into the world of giant sloths captivated you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're exploring the most amazing extinct species, bringing their stories to life and asking what if. Join us as we discover the creatures that once made our world so much more wondrous. Until next time on Extinct Species Today, remember the past, protect the present.